Just a reminder that any thoughts, opinions, and points of views expressed during this podcast are those of the individual and not of the Grand Lodge, appendant body, or concordant body that individual may belong.
What's going on? We're here for another episode. So excited. Got my buddy TJ Brumfield from Nebraska. We're going to be talking to him tonight about his background, what he likes to study, some of the things and presentations that he's done in the past, things that he's got going on in the future. We're just excited to have him here on Pen and Compass podcast. And with that, I'll start asking some questions, but TJ, you're on mute. Take it away, man. How are you feeling tonight? What's going on?
I'm feeling fantastic. I'm really excited to be here. You're one of my favorite Masons. We've got shared a lot of interests. Your presentations, your breakdown of Royal Arch Ritual is something I really, really love. Royal Arch is one of my favorite organizations. I feel like that there's a lot of really great deep meaning in the capitular degrees. You and I seem to share that interest. And so I really love, the brief time I've gotten to know you, breakdown a ritual and your love for the capitular degrees really, really speaks to me. So I just came actually home from, just got walked in the door from a York Rite meeting tonight. I just got home from Commandery, and I'm excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah, that's why I'm in a t-shirt because I had beer and pizza tonight. It's a Friday night, by the way, when we're recording this, and that's why he's in a white shirt and a black tie because he's been being a Sir Knight in the York Rite tonight. So great. Yeah, that's I don't want this to make this about me, but you're right. I have, especially in the last 5 years, totally given my heart and soul to the study of the Royal Arch and everything Royal Arch. That's a I don't want to start down that path, but I don't want to dive into that vault. So just kind of talking about that. I mean, that's a good segue though. What I was going to talk to you about, first thing that I thought of, and then I try to ask on kind of a structured basis in this podcast, is what's your vision in the realm of Masonic education, and what would you kind of answer kind of both of these things if you can, and what's kind of your definition of that? Because I say Masonic education, and I get all kinds of things like, oh, well, you need to study and memorize the ritual better. You need to learn the laws and constitution of your grand jurisdiction, or you need to learn how to secure the building, or all these things that are not study of symbolism and esoterics and the deep meanings of the gift that we've been given in our fraternity ritual. So anyway,
I think
how would
the
you? Yeah.
short answer is Masonic education is anything that you make it, any practical skills. So, and I'm the chair for the Grand Lodge Education Committee in Nebraska, and there was a past master who said, "Hey, I don't like when you guys talk about symbolism and esoteric stuff. That doesn't interest me in the least. Like, you need to be teaching people practical skills, how to run a lodge and education and leadership." And I think there's value in that. I try to mix it up for the education I do for different organizations and cater to the audience, I think, what they're looking for. But I do think that I am very passionate about symbolism and esoteric studies. And so I find that stuff really fascinating. And I think that there are a lot of like-minded Masons, but that's not every Mason. And so I think that if you go into a Blue Lodge and you try to say, hey, let's really dive deep into sacred geometry today, I'm going to lose a lot of guys in the room, unfortunately. And so that's where, depending on the organization, if I'm doing a presentation at the Scottish Rite or maybe a York Rite body, either SRCF or something like that, another organization, I may get kind of deeper into the woods. But often in Blue Lodge, I keep my presentations really short, and I try to have practical lessons of like the very first education piece I ever did for a Blue Lodge. We did a Socratic circle and a round circle. And I asked somebody, I said, what was the decision you made differently in your life because of lessons you've taught in Masonry? And not a single man in the room could come up with an answer. These are men of good character, good Masons, good, memorized the ritual, knew the words, but they had never applied it. And so I try very hard to make sure that when I'm doing education, that there's lessons you could take from that can actually enrich your life and make sure that you can apply these working tools. We're supposed to labor in the quarries as Masons, right? We're supposed to actually be bettering ourselves in laboring. And if you don't come away with tools, then maybe we haven't done our job. And maybe that's really the definition of Masonic education, is something that gives you a new tool that you can leverage. Whether that tool is more esoteric to sharpen your mind, or simple things of leadership skills and practical things of how to run a lodge. Um, well, I think history is important. I try not to do a lot of dry history, because a lot of times it's hard to take applicable lessons and tools from the dry history and say, was Ashmole the first, a speculative Mason, and why was Ashmole important or not important, and why did the two Grand Lodges in England join? That stuff, I think a lot of people don't. There are certain history nerds, but a lot of people, I think, that they don't care about it. You bore people with that.
I think you're right, and I think within our tribe, there's a tribe. We're building our own kind of tribe and nation. There's a group of us. We're so blessed. We have Zoom now. We get to go to things like Masonic Week and spend time together, and some of us go visit each other in our respective states, and get to just totally hang out. And I think there's a group of us that we love the art for art, and we appreciate it, the symbolism, the esoterics, the deeper kind of contemplative pursuits. And I think also it's your maturity in Freemasonry and where you're at. So for me, I've done all the leadership stuff. I've taken the courses. I've taught the courses. I've written. So, and then I'm not trying to make this about me, but I'm trying to add to what you just said, and it's very much where you're at kind of thing. And I think for me, a philosophy that I think what you're saying there, and I'd like to hear your kind of comments on this, is I just want people to do Freemasonry the way that they enjoy it. And if that's fundraising and doing things for charities and wearing certain things on their head to do that and helping out and whatever, and that's what they get joy out of, go do that. But don't put me in that same box and kind of like, hey, here's the standard. You got to do it just like me. And I think that's what we're looking for. Some of us, we just want to kind of do our own thing. We want that tolerance that's supposed to be there. What do you think? What do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. Each lodge has its own culture, and I think that's fantastic. We've got a lodge that meets downtown. It's businessmen that have a cocktail lunch. And generally, the guys at that lodge generally aren't as interested in the esoteric. They want to have kind of more of a networking thing, hang out with a good group of guys, meet together for a really short meeting downtown, have a cocktail lunch. There are lodges that really are focused on education in Nebraska. There's some that are more rural, and they just want to have fishing buddies. And it's not for me to say that one person is doing Mason right or wrong. If you find value in it, and the brother in your lodge are enjoying each other's fellowship, and you're thriving, that's great. One thing in Nebraska that our Grand Lodge actually mandates every lodge have two committees explicitly, and only these two committees are the minimum that are mandated. One is membership, because you can't thrive if you don't have members, and second is education. And some people go, why do we mandate every lodge in Nebraska have an education committee? And I think education feeds into membership. And I think when you're doing it right, it is so critical to the lifeblood of what makes Masonry work. There's a lot of fraternal organizations out there, but we try to, you got to actually walk the walk about taking good men and making them better. And there's a lot of people that they pay the initiation fees, they knock on our door, they go through the initiation ceremonies, they get raised Master Mason. 2 years later, we never see him again, non-payment of dues, and we're bleeding out members. I'm like, well, why? We invited him to sit on the sidelines for, a 90-minute business meeting and sit silent as we argue about paying the bills. And why aren't they coming around? Well, they came looking for something. There's a reason they gave us money. There's a reason they knocked at our door, and they were looking for something. And not every Mason is looking for esoteric education, but I think education on some level is what really drives a lot of people to come to look at Masonry and not other fraternal orders or social orders. And so if you fail to deliver that, you're not going to have membership. you're not going to have that lifeblood that makes Masonry work. And I think it is so critical. We look at the traditional observance movement and all this other stuff. A lot of the rekindling that's making Masonry thrive in places, it's built on education. It really is.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are just kind of like, okay, we're all in our 40s and 50s, maybe early 60s, and we all kind of are Gen Xers and such, and we're all kind of like, this is what we want out of life. And there's a lot of the other generations below us, the millennials, Gen Z, whatever, they're looking for the same things. And what an awesome opportunity for us to get to be their mentors. But what's so fun is once you mentor them for a while and they raise their game, those are the ones that have the desire, the talent, the whatever. Um, that's when it gets fun for me. I mean, I keep making sure that I reach out to the newest member and just seeing what they need. Not trying to be their mentor necessarily, just like, hey, I'm always here for you. You know,
I
that
think
type of thing.
mentorship is a big part of education. It's not necessarily esoteric. And you talked about you're at a point where you don't necessarily need the leadership education that much, but it is a big part of what lodges should be doing. And if you don't, I think that, that's where you lose people is that if you mentor someone that you get a strong connection with the lodge, also not just in masonry, in every facet of your life, professionally, spiritually, with whatever you're doing, your hobbies, if you just want to be a better tennis player, chess player, whatever you want to do in your life, you should have someone actively mentoring you, and you should be actively mentoring someone in every facet of your life. If you're not, you're missing out because we need to pass on leadership and information to further generations, and you should be looking to grow and get better. And you can't grow and get better if you don't have someone to check you on your cognitive dissonance, your bias, will not call out your faults, give you good advice. You always need mentors in every facet of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking a lot more operational stuff. We'll get into some other things, but this is good. I think for me, um, whenever those guys that I get the blessing of answering their questions and getting to show them something that is my interpretation, um, and then they ask me something I never, well, it's amazing what I learned back. And if I hadn't had those conversations, like you're talking about, there'd been a blind spot that I'd have never seen. And there's only so much that I can humanly consume. So anyway, I want to move on. Great stuff, but I just want to move on to, so out of all the things kind of related, I guess, to esotericism, symbolism, kind of, I want to be real broad the way I ask this. What's your favorite subject matter of study? I think I know, but I'd like to. I'm pretty. I'd put good money on down on a table in Vegas. I'd probably make a pretty strong bet here, but I want to hear it from you and kind of what is going on there.
So the presentation I'm going to be giving down in San Antonio for this year is on Kabbalism. And I think that that's probably one of my primary focuses. I consider myself a bit of a generalist. I do think that there is value in different types of symbolism, and there's different ways. These are all ways to express thoughts. Um, and I think probably my top two would be sacred geometry and Kabbalism. I think that if I was really, if I was really pressed to pick a favorite area of subject, but I mean, even Kabbalism then just ties into other things like gematria and
We're getting to all that. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but you know, um, I was I was sitting at SRCF High Council, and Piers Vaughn was giving a talk on numbers and the symbolism of numbers and letters and the things that they can represent and how they have changed throughout history and why we use them. And I was saying, well, if we believe that say the Tower of Babel, which may or may not have been a literal story, but if it was a literal story, that before everyone divided into all these different languages in the world, right? There was one language everyone spoke. And what would that be? And would that be numbers? Is that maybe the purest form of expression? And is that the most consistent language we have? Because every form of language, math, symbolism, esoterics, these are just different ways of describing and understanding the universe around us. To say that this is orange or whatever is just to say that is that I know this because I know that there's an attribute about this that is defined and I can comprehend and I can convey that concept to you, right? But that's just a word. And all of these things are ways for us to gain a deeper understanding of something, to perceive it and to comprehend it. And the more that we are able to describe and understand the universe around us, we have a better understanding of our creator and ourselves and our role in that creation. So I'm a generalist. I like different types of symbolism, but I really do like to dive into those for those particular reasons because I feel like that they are ways to describe and understand the universe around you.
Yeah. I think some of the things that you and I would kind of touch on would be, I think a lot about shapes. I think a lot about colors. No, I'm an outside salesman, so I can't do math in public. I'm not allowed to. I shouldn't. It's very embarrassing. But yeah, numbers are there, and there's certain numbers that I'm really attached to. Um, so we have lurking in the wings here. He'll come on a little bit later in this episode. But kind of I have general concepts of like alchemy and things like that I enjoy. All right, so moving on, we'll try to keep going here. So the next question, there's no right or wrong answer here, okay? But this is something that we're asking on every episode. So Stones or Beatles?
Oh, the Beatles.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay, you have to that especially if you went that quick, you have to say why.
So it's funny that I think that the Beatles were very humble that they looked to the like the Beach Boys and they're like they're innovating in music recording and the things that they were doing. Michael Stipes of REM, he's like the Beatles are just boring elevator music. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is the innovations that they were doing that we take for granted in modern music, the way that they changed the game. I think that the Rolling Stones are a prolific and successful rock band and they're fantastic, but I don't know that they changed the game the way that the Beatles did. The Beatles have the Guinness Book World Record for the most number one hits, but they also have the Guinness World Book Record for the most number of covered songs by other artists professionally. That they were fantastic songwriters and they were inventing new techniques left and right in the recording industry and how the business should work and how a band should operate. And what's interesting is if you look in their early career, they didn't have freedom early on. The studio was telling them what haircuts to have and what suits to wear and how you have to operate. The studio mandated what drummer they're going to have, kicked out Pete Best and brought in Ringo. And they were a studio mandated band that didn't have a lot of freedom. And what's crazy is their entire career, all the albums they recorded, every song they wrote, their entire career of going from having no freedom to reinventing music was 7 years.
Yeah.
The Stones have had decades to do everything that they've done. And I have respect for them. But the innovation and the way that they changed the game in such a short period of time, it blows my mind. I don't think that, my kids can comprehend that, the entire world was listening to the same music. Now it's hundreds of TV channels, but millions of YouTube channels and Twitch
Oh
streams,
yeah.
talks and vines. Everybody is consuming different medium that we don't have this cultural zeitgeist to where everybody in the world was watching Ed Sullivan and everybody was watching the Beatles. The notion that one artist could touch the whole world at the same time, I'm not sure that we will ever be in that situation again. And so they were there at the right time, the right place. Quentin Tarantino says everybody is inherently an Elvis person or a Beatles person. You could like both, but you can't. He divided Elvis and Beatles rather than Stones. Metric, another band I like. They talk about Stones or Beatles. But
So
yeah,
this comes out of No Reservations. This is actually kind of a little wink for me. One of my favorite people ever on television or whatever, Anthony Bourdain. May he rest in peace. And
love
so he asked this in like an episode whenever he was trying to figure out where he was going to go film like viewers episodes. and kind of that. And that was kind of his interview process. And I always thought that's so cool. You need to ask that. For me, I'm a Stones guy over the Beatles. I'm a little bit more aligned with Michael Stipe. Um, I think the thing is if you're talking about rock band and in my little, not to argue, but kind of spin off of what you said, I think the Beatles took some of the same era, but it was more Motown, it was more Little Richard, it was more a different style of kind of R&B or prototypical R&B, where the Stones really brought two things out that kind of played on what Elvis was doing, and that's the true like blues from the South, whether and especially like the Mississippi Delta type stuff, the really kind of what they do on their album, and then also kind of bringing in a lot of honky tonk and a lot of like and kind of that leads into some other people. So I think because of their personal taste and interest and where they got once they got to a certain level and they got to do their own thing in the late 60s and early 70s and mid 70s. But yeah, and a lot of it just has to do with a lot of times people say who's the greatest rock band and they say the Beatles. I'm like, they're kind of great band that played pop music to me and was kind of especially in the beginning. So, but anyway.
Actually, I think they were a studio created mandated pop band early on. If I had a time machine, one of my absolute what ifs, I would love to go back in time is that when the Beatles were first discovered, they were playing this cavern club. And supposedly they were doing real early hard proto rock. And then the studio's like, you can't do that. We can't sell that. And said,
Yeah.
hey, you need to copy the pop music that all these other artists are doing. They were very influenced by a lot of black artists like Chuck Berry too, that people don't talk about.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. You go through and you listen. Like, wait a minute, that's a Chuck Berry song. Oh, wait a minute, that's a Little Richard song. Like,
yeah,
especially,
absolutely.
and
And they don't get the credit they probably
and
deserve.
Elvis did the same thing. I mean, and a lot of people did the same thing. But
I would love to hear that early Beatles rock that the studio basically killed when they were a little indie rock band playing at the Cavern Club. You hear some like just reportings, anecdotal reportings of what they were, and apparently they were actually a hard rock band early on. But also the life of that band was Stu Sutcliffe, who died. And then his death forced Paul McCartney to become the most famous bassist in existence. But Paul McCartney was like, I guess I got to play bass because Stu Sutcliffe died. So
right.
anyways, we could tangent on this.
Obviously, you're a subject matter expert in the Beatles, also.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is that his family thinks that John Lennon effectively killed him. They got drunk, and actually, after one of their shows one night, they got in an argument. They tussled in the street. John Lennon threw him to the ground and kicked him in the head. And he didn't die then, but a couple months later, Stu Sutcliffe died of a brain injury. And Stu Sutcliffe's family basically thinks the reason he died is he had like an embolism in his brain from John Lennon kicking him in the head. Not definitively proved, but there you go. They had two original members of the Beatles that were not in the famous Beatles later on. Stu Sutcliffe, the original bassist, and Pete Best, their original drummer. There
Yeah,
you go.
not ready for prime time yet.
So
So Stones have some things like that too. But anyway, trying to move on here. Let's see here. Actually, so I think my next question would be, where's it at? Where'd it go to? Personal history, interest. Where did that all start with? We're going to kind of shift gears and talk about Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. Because like you said all those nice things about me. And by the way, I don't know if I properly showed my appreciation for that. Thank you so much for saying those things about the Royal Arch. And I, I have put a lot of study in there, just like I know you have in Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism and kind of Judaism and Jewish culture and things like that. So like where do you think that all started out at? Like what kind of turned your head and you kind of go, "Ooh, wow, I can."
So I don't want to turn this all sad, but early in my life, I was kind of raised by some drug addict, abusive, narcissist parents, and they were fundamentalist Christians, but they were bad people, and they ended up in prison, and I ended up a homeless teenager. And so I was like, let me find religion and what speaks to me, not necessarily what my parents raised me in. And I didn't like the churches that I grew up in. So I tried to study every major religion out there and a little bit of everything out there. And in high school, I had a Jewish girlfriend. And early on, I was like, let me go into the New Age store and just dip my toes in the water. What can I find? Here's a tarot deck, and there's all these archetypical symbols. Why are these particular symbols? Why do we have a Jewish letter on every one of the major arcana? And what's the symbolism? Why do we use these symbols? And so this stuff started in high school and early on. And as I was dating a Jewish girl, and I'd go over to her house, and we'd have a Seder ceremony, and there was a meaning behind everything we did.
So Seder, just to make sure people understand, it's not a seance. Actually, we do that in my Christian church in the Easter season because it's also Passover season,
Yes.
and we have Jewish men. Anyway, yeah. And so Seder is basically the Last Supper. What we feel like that is it's the Jewish tradition of a family meal or a group meal on Passover. It basically takes you through. It's very ritualistic. It's beautiful. It's amazing.
So I've been asking Matthew Parker for years, a
Yeah,
Jewish
it's
worker.
Seder, just for people that, as we have some people maybe seeking knowledge, when it comes around to Easter Passover time, even if you're not religious and you love initiatic experiences, you will get something out of that. Sorry,
Oh,
that's
it's
a
a
quick plug.
fantastic ritual, fantastic tradition. I finally convinced Matthew Parker to do a Seder for a Royal Arch chapter this year. So
Yeah.
we had a whole bunch of Royal Arch Masons who'd never seen a Seder before, and we did it together
Why,
after.
why, why don't we do one of those online?
I think it'd be fantastic.
Why don't we organize one of those online and invite all of our buddies and people that would enjoy? We need to mark that. We need to talk to Matthew about that.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
I think we need to do that.
And then I had questions about, well, if some of the stuff's in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, as Matthew would call it, he's like, don't call it the Old Testament. But these things are like, well, if these were commandments from God, and these are our sacraments, and these are our ceremonies,
Yeah.
why have you dropped and lost some of this? And so we talk about, we have a new covenant in the New Testament as Christians, but should we leave all that stuff behind? And maybe we should, I feel like we lost some of these practices, and I think that maybe it'd be
So,
important to revisit some of those.
so going back to I kind of jumped in on the Seder thing. So you went over and you did Seders with her family,
Yes.
and then how did it kind of progress? Where did it progress from there?
So I was studying comparative religion to see what religion might speak to me. And I always liked the Gospels and I liked the teachings of Jesus. I just didn't like some of the particular churches I was raised in. And so I studied everything out there. And when I say I studied every religion, I didn't become an expert in all of them, but I was reading religious texts for everything. The French Raelian cults, I was reading their texts and studying them. I was like, if there was any out there, any religion, in fact, for my Grand Lodge education session that I'll be doing at our Grand Lodge session, I'll be doing a talk on Taoism. And I love comparative religion. And I think that there is a certain kernel of truth and some moral lessons to be found in all of them. And then I circled back and in going into trying to dip into new age type of stuff early on and get into more esoteric and occult stuff early as a teenager, I found that almost every major new age text or source was pointing me back to early Jewish roots. And it's like, well, why does everything use the tree of life? Why is everything using gematria? Why is everything using the Hebrew alphabet? Why is it doesn't matter. It's like, here's,
Numerology.
numerology.
Numerology
Everything,
is huge in the type of subject matter you're talking about.
yeah, all this stuff kept pointing back to ultimately really the same source. And other people built on it and changed. And they said, here's correspondences we're going to add to this. And so when our other guest gets in, I'm sure he's going to want to talk about, Golden Dawn and
Well, he's
correspondence
not a guest; he's a co-host.
co-host. The other stuff they add on.
He's
And
he's the
yeah,
man behind the board
so there's a
and
wizard boss
making
that's
us all
more
look
the man
good here.
behind the curtain.
Rodney, yeah, Rodney. Yes, he is the wizard behind the curtain for sure.
Um, there are stuff that people have layered on and add connections and correspondences, but early sources for all this stuff just kept pointing back to that. And so when I studied all these religions, I came back to Christianity, and the Gospels always spoke to me. I always thought Jesus was a great teacher, and I landed back at Christianity. But I tried to be very kind of an open-minded Christian and embrace a lot of studying the Old Testament and Jewish mysticism and a lot of the stuff as well. I don't say that I practice Kabbalism as a theological practice, because I see that primarily as a Jewish practice and it would feel like almost appropriation, but I study it and I try to find lessons from it, but I don't actively practice as a theurgical practice because I don't know that it doesn't feel like right to me personally that
Yeah,
I have a right to.
I think I know what you're talking about, and I think it's similar to being from a certain background and ethnic background and culture, um, but having that hyphen there, like kind of being a Anglo-American or a Scottish American. Like you and I would probably Irish, whatever, Scots Irish or something or whatever, but we appreciate German food or Mexican food, that kind of thing, right? I mean, that's what you're
Right.
kind of talking about there. I mean, maybe it's a little bit.
Yeah, and I try to have a respectful line there. And it's funny that the presentation that you heard me give on Kabbalism actually kind of came about because when I was at Grand Lodge last year, there was someone who was organizing that Lyceum series, and he turned to me, and I was sitting next to Matthew, a Jewish brother, and he says, "TJ, I really want you to give a presentation on Kabbalism." I'm like, "Matthew's sitting right next to me. He's Jewish." He says, "No, I want you to be the one." He says, "I really like what you have to say on the matter," and I felt like it's weird as you talk about. I was talking about mentoring earlier, but you were talking about this particular period of where we are in our ages and our lives and so on and so forth. I feel like I'm turning a corner to where I didn't feel like I was an expert. I was turning to other people and saying, "Hey, you know so much more about the subject than me. I want to learn from you." I'm hitting that point where people keep looking to me now, saying, "Hey, we think you're pretty knowledgeable on the subject. What can you teach us?" And it's interesting that I'm transitioning more from being a mentee to more of a mentor in some of these subjects. And I thought it was really fascinating. I asked Matthew, I said, what do you feel, I'm qualified to talk on the subject and kind of ran some of it past him. And it went really, really well. The few times I've given it, I gave him my SRCF college and someone asked me afterwards, "He says, are you a professor?" He's like, "That's the best presentation I've ever heard." And I don't say to pat myself on the back, but it blew me away because I didn't feel like, do I know enough about this? I'm like, I've kind of been studying it for
Yeah,
20
I
years.
think all of us that are trying to do stuff, we enjoy it, but then when we get kind of outside of ourselves or maybe our real close inner triangle, it's not even a circle. It's and you're not even a circle. It's like you get these like couple of buddies that you really trust that you can talk with this about, and then you kind of open yourself up a little bit and you get some opportunities to do some things and you get some support, and then you're just kind of like, oh, I'm not an imposter. I know how to receive my wages. And it's great. And I think that's one of those things where I want to help promote. That's why we're doing this interview, is to help. You are one of those people that's kind of a diamond in the rough or a hidden great treasure out there, and that's what pin to hype a little bit about what we're doing here and why should subscribe to the YouTube channel and like this episode and all the episodes is because we're trying to promote different people that are pursuing a certain type of Masonic education and trying to what's the word? Give that to the world in their own way. And you're definitely the short time we've known each other less than a year. Um, and but kind of going back to that, isn't it crazy how you're being such close buddies with Matthew Parker from Nebraska also? I didn't know him except by name until July of 2023. Got the opportunity to go speak um, at an event, symposium in Michigan. He and I were picked up at the airport kind of at the same time. We were travel buddies until he went back to the airport on Sunday, from Friday night through Sunday, and spent a lot of time together. And we just became such good buddies. And then he's like, "Hey, I'm going to Masonic Week. What do you? It's my first time to go. My buddy's TJ's going too. Let's all like, if you've got time, Jeff, in your schedule." I'm like, "Absolutely." And then all of a sudden, we're in hospitality rooms and spending time together in Alexandria, Virginia, Arlington, Virginia, whatever you want to say, and had some just great times together. And I remember being in the hospitality room, and I was just really impressed, just way you were coming back with answers and stuff. And It's the same thing. And there's a lot of talent actually in that little group gathering that night. A lot of really great Masons, but a lot of great kind of educator, esoteric Masons, and people that want to promote that and support that. From well, we have Michigan, Nebraska, Texas, and Indiana. We have some guys from Indiana, maybe, or Illinois. Who else do we have there? Mainly Michigan guys. So we were kind of allowed to be in their presence. So, um, all right.
Great
What
group
other
of guys.
questions do I have for you? Let's see. What's next? Oh, one of the ones I like to ask next is, so where would you say you're starting out in your esoteric initiation type of experiences? Like, where did you feel like that came from? Sounds like I would say, I mean, I'm not going to answer it for you, but like the Satyrs were kind of a beginning there. For me, college fraternity was kind of the real formal thing, right? So what would you say?
Yes, Seder, I think, was probably the first type of ritual, and that almost felt like found family. That,
Mhm.
I didn't have that connection with my actual family, and here was another culture, another group bringing me in and teaching me, and going through an experience, a kind of a scripted ritual that people have been doing for centuries and centuries. And so going through a certain, ritual like that that is meant to bring you in and also to teach you certain lessons and to use symbols to convey concepts. I think that was probably my first proper initiation experience, whether it fully intended that or not. And it's funny that actually when I was so excited to join Masonry, that I expected it to be this amazing initiation. And I do love Masonry. I was kind of disappointed by my Blue Lodge initiation experience by a group of guys that were kind of going through the motions, but they didn't have thought and intention behind it. And I don't think that I wasn't initiated by a group of guys that were esoterically minded, or they weren't thinking of initiation as anything more than you got to do these steps so I can get this guy to join the shrine and do XYZ. And um, I've really tried very hard when I do ritual in any organization I do ritual where I confer to provide a proper initiatic experience with thought and intent. Um, I've always been very, very excited. And I think that there are two other groups that I've had proper, real, maybe the only real initiation experiences I've had in my life have been the SRSEF and another side group that's not strictly Masonic, but is very similar to Masonry. But I don't know that we provide good initiation experiences as much as we should.
Yeah, it depends on where, it's depending on where you're at and kind of what you're blessed with. Um, that's a good answer. I mean, that's it's always interesting to see where people are coming from, and that's great. So you kind of maybe answered it some, but maybe you could refine it. So what do you get out of ritual, actual live performances, initiation experiences? You kind of went into that, but as a candidate, you kind of talked about that already. A member, a degree team member, etc. You know, how does that all blend together for you?
So it connects the past, present, and future. I think is one of the unique things that I don't hear a lot of people talk enough about. So I did talk about intention and how we use symbols to convey a concept. So in the EA degree, if we're going to introduce someone to a point within a circle, we say, here's a tool and here's a symbol. But why are we presenting that? Because we're trying to teach a certain concept to you, right? But the thing that really excites me is the notion that somebody else was initiated with a very, very similar ritual 400 years ago. And in the future, after I'm gone, people are going to continue to be initiating people with these similar rituals. So I participated in a Master Mason degree a week or two ago, and I did the Master Mason third lecture. And the candidate was so excited. He was staring at a portrait of George Washington. He says, "It amazes me to know that what I'm going through tonight is what George Washington went through the exact same situation." And so having that connective tissue, and so you become joined into an organization, a new found family where everybody has that shared experience. In the Marine Corps, we had a big debate when I was in about hazing because of a bad incident, and should we have hazing or should we just rebrand as unit cohesion or should we get rid of it? When people have a shared experience, it connects them, and that connection, that that binds us together. Not only that we swore an obligation to do right by one another, but that we've experienced the same thing, I think is really meaningful.
So I think I like, I think for me the mystic tie versus the bond. Even though the bond it's kind of a different feeling, but I think the mystic tie is what you're talking about. Like where
Yes.
where we're tied together, and it's something that's kind of keeping us together. It's not like the bond's kind of a little bit more overwhelming, a little bit more heavy, but that tie is what kind of keeps us all kind of wrapped together. So, um, yeah, for me, it's kind of I almost would probably even need to start out these chat sessions with, "Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a ritual initiation addict. Hi, Jeff." And so I just love the ritual. And I was asked whenever I was speaking not too long ago how many individual degrees I've taken. And I actually sat down and did the math, and I think it's somewhere, of course, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was somewhere north of 105. And that includes college fraternity and, you know, like maybe just some different things. And I didn't, unfortunately, I never got into like Order of the Arrow or anything. I would have included that
Boy Scouts, yeah.
for my BSA Boy Scout of America adult leadership days. They just never voted me in. I was committee chair, not um, scout master, assistant scout master or anything. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of the things that you said there apply to a lot of people. And as I've gone through, I'm blessed to be in an area where we have a ton of the Hall of Famers from the past that were keeping the standard of the ritual high, and you could wake them up at 3 in the morning and ask them to burn through this particular charge or something, and they could knock it out or give you the obligation in the most excellent master's degree, letter perfect. Um, but not a lot of, well, what does that mean to you? Or where did where did this word come from or this name out, and I think the blessing that I've heard, you got the same blessing I did. There was nothing there. There was a void. And so it allowed you what I actually this week I actually thought about this as I was writing some other stuff. I think there's a concept, and maybe you like this term and you adopt it, and artistic curiosity. I think everybody that you and I enjoy spending time with and feel like are our kind of fellow tribe members of this kind of esoteric um, symbolism and interpretive type masonry that we're trying to pursue, is got this artistic curiosity, and they have this like in almost this, they can't not do it. It's like they can't turn it off. There is no off switch. We can't just go, okay, turn that off.
It's interesting that certain people are presented with the ritual and they are not inspired or challenged to dive deeper. It just doesn't speak to them. And then other people do have the innate curiosity. So I was at a Royal Order of Scotland event, and I was the presenter speaker this recent year, but this particular year I was not the presenter. Someone else, a doctor of theology and philosophy, was the presenter, and he was talking about the importance of the concept of zero that we got back from Muslims, and why zero was not important in mathematics, but also important in theology, and why the Catholic Church was threatened by zero, and why we got rid of zero for a while, and why it was so important to bring it back, and the religious implications
Pretty
of zero.
deep subject right there. That's pretty deep. Wow.
And then the threat by the concept of nothingness might imply that there is no God and all this. Like, we can't have nothingness, we can't have zero. But anyways, I asked him some questions afterwards about how this might relate to Ein Sof in Kabbalism, and also point in a circle and so on and so forth. And we had a little back and forth, some questions. And he's like, I really love these questions, and it challenged his beliefs. And we had some great follow-up conversation. The SGIG of the Nebraska Scouts Rite came up to me afterwards, and he said, "Where did you get that stuff you were talking about?" I said, fourth degree of the Scottish Rite. He says, what are you talking about? He says, do you know he says, as SGIG, when we can't do all the degree work, I go out and I communicate the concepts of the fourth degree to people. And also we had a Blue Lodge in our Scottish Rite where all the members have to become Scottish Rite if you join that particular Blue Lodge side of the Scottish Rite. And he would convey the concept of the fourth degree, and then they'd go through a full reunion. And he says, I've been doing the fourth degree for decades, and I don't know what you're talking about. I said, everything I was talking about was the fourth degree, the three big pillars behind you, and you got the tree of life behind you. He's like, yeah. He's like, I didn't know what these concepts are. And Ein Sof is not directly on the tree of life. But I was talking about Kabbalism. I said, so for decades, you've been doing the fourth degree, and for decades, you've been talking about the tree of life and these three pillars and Kabbalism. And I said, and you never thought to study it a little bit more, or to look into it. And some people, they've been saying those words, the ritual, for decades, and it just doesn't speak to them. And yeah, and some people, I guess they have that artistic curiosity. They're like, I need to figure out what this means and what the deeper meaning is. And you also, as an actor, when I used to do Shakespeare, I couldn't convey a concept to you if we were using an archaic term if I didn't understand it myself, and the audience may not know it. So when I did Much Ado About Nothing, talk about it, get stabbed by a dagger, I said she speaks poignards, so her insults are hurting me, but poignard is a dagger. But if you don't know what a poignard is, I can only convey that if I have intent and I'm visualizing the concept of a dagger, if I'm visualizing getting stabbed and hurt by it, that when I say it with a certain amount of intent, I can convey the concept of a symbol to the audience. But you have to be able to study it and look for that deeper meaning and be mindful of the intent of that symbol and what you're trying to convey. And when you do Shakespeare right, people can understand it even if they don't understand the words.
So
I'm sorry. I'm going
no,
off.
no, it's great. It's great because I was sitting there, and as soon as you said, "Now, what's the alternative? What's the synonym for dagger that you just said?
Poignard.
Poignard. Yeah. Um, that's in that's a major symbol in the Knights of Constantinople degree. That's a part of the actual crest and all the insignia and everything in there, out of the Allied Masonic degrees. And so, yeah, and that's why I love all this stuff because all of a sudden that just came to me, right? Because I'm like, oh, well, that's in there. That's different, and it's different than other stuff without going in any more in depth and
I'm
detail.
a member of three different allied. I'm an officer in three different AMD councils. I'll be at one AMD council this weekend, and a week from tonight, I'll be at another one in Iowa. So yeah,
Yeah,
I love those degrees. And actually, when I was reading that degree the first time in AMD, and I came across Pointer, I was like, ah.
yeah, it's love those aha moments. So, kind of going back and I think this kind of is a good thing to kind of get a lot of the stuff you've already said, but give you another opportunity to kind of refine it a little bit, maybe with your mallet and your chisel. Um, so, how does your Freemasonry flow in and through your beliefs in Christianity and your affinities with Judaism?
That's a fantastic question, and especially as we had somebody who was petitioned one of my lodges this past year, and he was so excited to become a Mason. And then when his church heard it, they're like, "Hey, we think Masonry is evil. You can't be a member of our church to be a Mason." And so they told him to drop Masonry. And I find it really sad when people think that Masonry is not compatible with your faith, whatever your faith is. Masonry does not have dogmatic beliefs. Masonry doesn't tell me to believe a certain thing about Jesus or to believe a certain thing about God. Masonry only teaches philosophy, virtues, symbolism, right? But it tells me to go back and to mine deeper into my faith and my religion constantly. The Master Mason third lecture tells you need to be dependent upon your volume of sacred law, your book of scripture. Go back to the Bible, the Tanakh, the Quran, whatever you read, and the Tao Te Ching. Read that and mind that. It points back to that over and over and over again. The charge in the past master degree, you bring the guy back and you like point to the Bible and you say, do you know how important this is? Masonry keeps pointing me back and has encouraged me to study scripture and to look for important symbolisms. And actually, one of the things in Kabbalism is exegesis, is when you look for an interpretation, you look for a deeper meaning. you look at the scripture and you don't just take it at face value, that you're trying to find lesson.
Yeah, and that's a big part of modern, especially Protestant Christianity. I mean, the way I and so help me out because I don't think you and I've ever talked about this. What denomination would you feel like, or where do you feel comfortable with your when you go and practice Christianity and worship, and where do you connect into?
A Lutheran church. And for a variety of reasons, I like, Luther had, pretty big cojones to put up the 95 Theses and say, hey, wait a minute, uh, and to challenge the structure of the Pope in the church. Martin Luther brought music into the church, modern music, and he said, drinking beer is not necessarily a bad thing. You can enjoy music and you can enjoy beer and be a man of good faith. He was also anti-Semitic, and every person's got some problems. But Martin Luther's a pretty good guy. Um, I reference Matthew Parker a million times in this, but Matthew Parker says he's not sure that any one religion or any one church has got 100% right. And
So, and I think the way I take it, and the discussions I've been in for 20 years, especially as you remember whenever things were moving from being robes and organ music and pianos and hymns and kind of a certain way, especially for I'm Southern Baptist, and even though we go, oh, we don't have rituals, like yes, you're very ritualistic. Everybody even has their assigned seats almost on in pews, and they don't have like they go, no, this part of the pew is where my family sits for the last 40 years. You have rituals, people. Come on.
baptism
And
is a ritual; it's a sacrament.
huh? Yeah,
Baptism is itself a ritual; it's a
yeah.
sacrament.
Well, without going into the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 whatever, but I think you just go and find, and so there's been this whole discussion, and this was back 20 something years ago, whenever contemporary Christian music, and you started having like those stations, and you had that explosion and stuff in the 90s, and I just love a certain type of rock and roll, let's get down church. And my church, even, I'm so blessed. We have the traditional thing. You can go, and this is kind of where I come from. I mean, I live in a big suburban area, and we have so many choices, and it's not like, hey, there's not just like this one packaging of it. And so I think, kind of that's the way I do my Christianity. So I'd love to do my Masonry the same way. And sometimes it's kind of a speed bump to building relationships with people whenever they're just so dogmatic about you've got to be in this organization or that organization, and how can you be a real, going back to Mick Jagger, that he can't be the same level of man as me because he doesn't wear the same, what is it that he says in one of those songs? He says he doesn't use the same washing detergent to get his white shirts white or whatever. So yeah, I think that's the thing. So, but how do you feel like your Judaism enhances? I think you've answered this, but where do you think really Judaism, and especially your Royal Arch membership, right? Because that's whenever it blew up for me, and being in my church that has a Jewish, man in it. So,
All the symbolism of the capitular degrees, most of that symbolism is heavily into the Old Testament. And we talk about, I just did a presentation recently about the four veils in the Royal Arch. And I don't want to spoil them completely for people who aren't Royal Arch Masons. And so I was like, well, we say in the ritual a little bit that these reference the four primary tribes of Israel. And in England, they actually have all 12 tribes represented. They have 12 veils, not just four. But it's deeper than that.
I'm
Why do
aware.
they have these particular animals and these symbols on these banners? And it actually goes to a prophetic vision, and that vision actually led to a whole school of mysticism in Judaism. I'm going to mispronounce it. Merkabah, or I think Merkabah. But it's a school of Jewish mysticism, all based upon that particular prophet vision of the chariots and the animals that were the grammaton, those particular animals, that vision. So if you really want to understand those degrees and the symbols that are in the degrees, so much of that is in the Old Testament or the Tanakh. but how does it also enrich my Christianity? To a certain extent, you could say, well, a lot of the particular laws, like the first five books of the Bible, a lot of that is laws that were part of an old covenant sacrament, that those laws may not apply today with a new covenant in Christianity. But the stories of moral lessons and wanting to understand God on a certain level of if I want to understand my creator and my relationship with my creator and how the universe works, if you skip half the Bible and you're not really studying for deep messages and deep lessons in the Old Testament, you're missing out. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's a lot of meat on the bone there. And it's unfortunate when I was younger, I was like, tried reading the Old Testament, this person begat this person begat that. That's boring. Then the New Testament, Jesus is teaching parables. I'm like, this is great, love this. And as I get older, I appreciate the Old Testament more and more, the symbolism, the deep, rich veins of lessons that are contained within that I just missed out when I was younger.
Well, in kind of movie franchises or literary franchises, I always love the flashback origin story.
Yes.
If that's not, at least that's the way, that's the way it's arranged, kind of organized in Texas Royal Arch Masonry. Amazing. Like our degree is always just kind of prequeling you to death, and kind of you're bouncing all around on the chronological timeline. So, um, yeah, for me, my I think our kind of overlapping appreciation is the study of the tabernacle. And so grew up Baptist, my wife Anglican, and been to many of her high church, visited on different times, and especially like at Easter and Christmas and things when things are really amped up. And it just always amazed me, the more I was in Freemasonry and the more I was getting those lessons, how I started seeing the symbolism just scream at me of what's going on there. The more I learned about the tabernacle.
I think that that is arguably the very core of what masonry is to a certain level. And I was actually talking with Sean Ayers, who's the chief editor for Philadelphia's magazine. Brilliant guy, great guy out in DC. And we were disagreeing slightly, and I was trying to be open-minded to his interpretation of why temple building is important and the symbolism of the temple. And I think that is very core, all of craft masonry in particular, the Blue Lodge chapter degrees and the council degrees in particular, that erecting a temple is just at the center of every one of those degrees and all of those particular lessons. And why do we have these tools and what are we ultimately trying to achieve? And I don't want to spoil it. I don't think there's probably a lot of non-Masons listening to this podcast, but I think that really the core lessons come down to erecting a spiritual temple, and in which we could house God in. And have a closer connection to deity is at the absolute core of everything that Masonry teaches in all of these bodies. And so there was a fantastic book. J.P. Lamb wrote The Archetypical Temple, I believe, a great book on the intent and the symbolism and the thought behind a symbolic temple building.
I think even the most um, the guy that knows the ritual inside and out, I think he still gets that to a certain point. I think I see even when I'm having those discussions that they're like, this is I'm making a place for God in my life. I'm making this conscious effort, and sometimes some people kind of get lost in that, and they have to kind of maybe find that at some point. But yeah, um, so let's see here. What else do I have? Where would you have people start their pursuit and interests? Me seeing you as a subject matter for Kabbalah, if they want to start kind of in a place, a certain, where would you kind of guide them to for that knowledge and kind of things like that?
That's a really good question. So for Kabbalism, the source text, the Zohar, is basically all of Kabbalism comes from one particular book. So I would say that that would be a starting point. There are a lot of reference materials that people have written other books that explain Kabbalism to you. But I think that you should try to get an unbiased opinion, not shaped by somebody else, if possible, to the source material itself. That Kabbalism is ultimately a method of for which teaches you how to go back and revisit scripture and to get an interpretation out of it. Kabbalism actually teaches you a lot of things. One of those major practices is the exegesis of the interpretation and basically getting meat out of the scripture and the symbolic lessons from it. But I would actually encourage people to read the original Zohar, a translation of it, and use that as a source material. And from there, then eventually go to reference text. If you're struggling with it and you feel like you really need a reference text, then you can go seek those out. But go straight to the source and let it try to speak to you, is what I would say.
Do you have any like websites, apps, YouTubers, kind of podcasters that you could kind of share the love with, and who would you kind of point them to, maybe specifically?
That's a really good question. So actually, I first started studying this with books in New Age stores in the old market,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
You
So
started 40 years ago. You got a head start on a lot of us. So,
yeah. So the question
but
is,
but in the modern times, whenever they're just kind of being able to consume it, and nice places where they can get kind of free information, and it's not going to cost them an arm and a leg to kind of get interested and get a little bit of knowledge.
no, that's a really good question. Actually, I haven't really looked into apps and podcasts, and
So I'll feed you a few. Chabad.org is one
okay.
of my favorites. They do a really great job. And then the app that I use, my shout out to my buddy Stanley Payne. That's my York buddy. It's let me look at it here on my phone.
I'm actually
I'm gonna say it wrong. Sefaria, Safara.
yes. So
That has like all those texts online for free, the Tanakh and things like that. And then I think for me also, and then the Alphabet, that might be a part of Chabad. No, Chabad's got its own app. I've got those are the three that I've got kind of that sometimes I interact with. Um, but and also, what's the guy that's um, on YouTube? He's a rabbi. Talks it's Esoterica. Jacob,
yes.
what I forget his last name. Jacob.
His channel actually, he just got a takedown of like his.
Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah.
I was really disappointed. His channel is actually really really good, and I'm trying to think of his name at the
There's
moment.
there's also that there's also well, we'll have to come back to that. Maybe we'll share some of those things.
I struggle. I'm lazy and bad. Since I read it from the books and I didn't learn from a spoken teacher, I was assuming a lot of the pronunciations. And I've had bad habits, a lot of the pronunciations. And Matthew's like, coward, go learn the proper Jewish pronunciation of these things. And that's I'm going to challenge myself to get better on that. But even when I've looked it up and I've heard from rabbis, I've actually heard conflicting pronunciations of like Sephiroth or Sephirot. And I'm trying to narrow down, especially before I do this presentation, of try to get better about my actual Hebrew pronunciations of some of these terms. But even that one, as I've looked up and here, I've heard different rabbis even pronounce that one particularly different.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Okay. If you think of anything specific, I kind of hit you on that one, but so what happens? This is kind of maybe revealing a little bit about me, but I'd love to hear your side of it. What happens for you when you get into a deep contemplative symbolism of the degree work, or just in general, you're trying to connect the dots on something. You're trying to work something out, your own interpretation, or maybe you get it like, you get spurred by a question from a learner, an acolyte, a neophyte, and you're trying to kind of mentor them as kind of their lead and their guide. How does that work for you?
So I know a lot of people, they will particular meditate and they will often do there's an exercise where you'll often take a candle in a mirror and you'll try to kind of like think on just particularly that as you stare at kind of the reflection of the candle and look past the candle in the mirror and use that as a meditative technique. But for me, I get more cerebral then maybe is not. I think a lot of people that would be more practical in their exercises of trying to find an esoteric meaning might get more into a meditative state. And often I struggle with that personally, and I think it's my ADHD brain can't slow down and get to the meditative state as much as I'd like to.
So
And
how does that? But I'm talking about like kind of within the context of Freemasonry.
so,
Maybe I didn't lead you there.
okay.
This is all kind of coming back to, you
So I
know,
try to same thing both with scripture and masonry. And so if someone takes like one particular symbol or lesson and say, I want to take Ein Sof, or not Ein Sof, I want to take the point in the circle in the EA, and how should I interpret that? I say, well, it's in the context of the first degree of masonry. What is the whole EA degree is trying to tell me? What is craft masonry in the whole trying to tell me? And if I take context clues of everything around it and say that this is meant to be an iterative lesson, that this symbol is key to this degree, and this degree is the first step that builds you towards the fellowcraft, eventually towards the master mason degree, then ultimately if the key lesson of all of craft masonry is this, then the context of everything surrounding it is what points and informs how I would interpret the specific symbol of a point within a circle, of knowing the context of everything around it. Same thing with scripture. I wouldn't just take one verse out of context by itself and say, how do I interpret this if you don't know the larger section of that whole chapter of scripture and that book, and then everything around it that's trying to tell, and like what series of books are these histories or these prophecies? Should it be literal or is this more metaphorical?
so one of
These
the things that I've done before in teaching things is get people into reading out loud the scripture the way we have it in our particular grand jurisdiction in whatever version it's in there, usually King James, right? And getting them to read it in different, sometimes maybe 9 or 10 deep, and just going through the different translations of that same Bible verse
having it
and
slightly
and how it's been kind of tweaked through different interpreters or different, different interpreters of the same verse, whether it be in Hebrew or whether it be in Greek. Um,
I like to get a good student Bible and look for different ways to translate some of those words and different ways to interpret it. There's this isn't really a Masonic secret. Amos chapter 7 is used in the Fellowcraft degree. Use a couple verses in Amos 7. And I love pointing to this particular one. And Amos said, God said to Amos, "When you see a plumb line?" And God says, "I'm not going to pass by you again." So, okay, well, what does this mean? I'm not going to overlook you. I'm going to come around. I'm going to reward you. I'm going to make sure I'm looking out for you and I'm there to help you out. No, he's basically saying, I'm going to punish you. I'm going to hold you accountable. And if
mhm.
you read the larger story around it, because we only hear a couple verses in that degree, that basically Amos was a prophet, and the people basically said, "We know that we are God's chosen people. We're always going to be protected. So we don't need to walk the walk. We don't need to hold our sacraments, and we don't have to hold our obligations, and we don't have to keep our covenant. We can just basically do whatever that we want, and God's always going to reward us because we're God's chosen people." And so God's like, you guys are getting out of line. I'm going to punish you guys now. And Amos is the prophet. He advocates the people. Old Testament prophets would argue with God and challenge him. And so Amos is like, hey, please, 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 give us a pass. Let us go one more time, and we're going to get another chance. And he pleads with God multiple times. And eventually God's like, no, I've given you guys lessons. I've given you a covenant. And now you need to start walking the walk. I'm going to start holding you. I'm going to put a plumb line in front of your people. And I'm going to start holding you accountable that you have to walk the walk. And this is a lesson that we are giving these Bible verses as you go to the fellowcraft. As an EA, you're just being taught the initial lessons. I can't expect you to be upholding the lessons of masonry when you're first learning them. But as a fellowcraft, you know what? Now you've been familiar with these lessons for a while. Now you know the morality of masonry. It's time that we eventually say, from here on out, we're going to start holding you accountable. We're going to hold you to a higher standard. And if you look at the overall context and you read the verses around it, not just the verses by themselves, a larger picture appears. And then you realize, again, these verses not by themselves, but the larger chapter of Amos 7 and the context of what we are doing in that moment of the fellowcraft degree. And then this story unfolds, and you just find so much more meaning than what is presented, the rote words by themselves.
Amazing. Yeah, and that's when that's when it starts meaning something to you personally. That's when it really starts sinking in whenever you're saying, okay, now how does this apply to me? And kind of going back to your point, it's been fun for me to work with a non-Mason, one of my best friends in the world. I got to work with him for almost 2 years. And we would maybe have frustrations within company policy. We were kind of sales team together, and something would come up, and one he'd fly off the handle about something, and I'd be like, dude, I'm going to tell you this little kind of summarized thing of what we study. And he goes, wow, I see your point there. And it's like I'm just going to take this lesson that I've learned in this degree and apply it to this kind of business politics situation, kind of this, this little internal power struggle, and how I'm going to react to this, and how I'm going to get through the day and just, go on with life. And I'm trying to do that more and more and more. And I think you're trying to do those same kind of things. So,
I
all
pull a lot of philosophy both out of Masonry and Stoicism, and I do bring it into the workplace. And I teach people when they're in a circumstance and they're like they're upset about something, and they're upset about what another team is doing, what their employee is doing, what's happening elsewhere. And we can't get fixated on what is happening with other people, what other people are doing. We need to be fixated on what we can control and our reaction to it, and that we have a mandate and obligation to have an ethical response to, regardless of whether outside stimuli is fair, doesn't matter.
right.
And it is amazing that you can take these lessons. I'm actually disappointed when people don't find, nuggets of wisdom and tools to actually labor in the quarries, to take that chisel and mallet, to apply this stuff in their actual life. And I do find, as I'm mentoring my employees as a manager or whatever, that I can actually take philosophy, Freemasonry, and use it to teach people who are non-Masons in ways.
There's a reason that our groups have been around for a couple hundred years, several hundred years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, there's the reason that people still read the Bible, and they still read sacred texts and things like that. So before I go, I had like another question I wanted to ask you about. I think before, something I didn't really prepare, but I think so. What is your kind of thing that you're doing? Project wise, do you have are you working on books behind the scenes? Are you writing? Are you trying to, are you looking at getting published in magazines, or like, I know you're doing a lot of presentation work and kind of education, kind of statewide and kind of Midwestern, regionally. So what do you got what have you done in the past that you're proud of? What do you got kind of going on now, and what do you have already kind of scheduled for the future?
So I'm an officer in like 12 Masonic bodies at once, and I've also had imposter syndromes where I don't want to submit to publication a lot of places. Like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. There's better experts out there. And Sean Ayers was like, no, submit to like these. And I'm gonna make it a goal in 2025 to be published more. I've got a piece I'm submitting to Fraternal Review on Noblesse Oblige. We're gonna have a special interest that is the publication for the Southern California Research Lodge there. And so they're gonna have a special issue on chivalry and chivalric values, and I'm gonna do a piece specifically on Noblesse Oblige. I'm constantly doing presentations and speaking places. I haven't written to be published in a whole lot of Masonic places, and I'm gonna try and change that. And so,
Yeah, we need to talk about that. I got some things that I've done because to get out of my kind of out of my own shadow, and kind of move in, and this is kind of what I want this to be about. Pen and compass. I want this to be like your chance to kind of your debutante ball. Your way to kind of be out there. And I enjoy conversations, whether it be kind of text wise or when we get a chance to talk. uh, Very limited, but for me, we'll just go through. I'll go. We'll do that offline. I don't want to do
No,
that here.
I do have a project I actually want to talk to you about a
Yeah, that'd be
little.
great.
And that is, I'd like to actually talk about this context of how you take the symbolism and you need to get the stuff around it, and also like look at the different translations. So I want to do that for the craft Masonic degrees, Blue Lodge Chapter Council. And I want to basically take the earlier versions that we are aware of these degrees, and I actually have some old monitors and old books. I just got a new one from 1919, but I've got some really old stuff going way, way back. But I just got another one for Royal Arch degrees, and it's interesting seeing in different places how these evolved at different points in time, and seeing what were the earliest versions of them, how do they evolve, why do they evolve, and what is all the context around them, and basically mine them to say, okay, here's the symbolic lessons we can take from them of craft Masonic degrees on the whole, of Blue Lodge Chapter Council as a big package, and everything that surrounds it, all the historical versions, and say, here's all the context necessary for you to unpack this, and not for me dogmatically to say this is the definitive truth of this symbol, but to say here's 3 or 4 different possible interpretations for the symbol. Here's kind of the way I'm leaning, but I want to give you all of the tools and all the context for you to come up with your interpretation of how this speaks to you and what your interpretation of this is. So I've been compiling a lot of resources of earlier versions of various degrees, and now I need to just kind of get off my butt and write that. So that's kind
Yeah,
of my goal for next year.
it's funny. There might be someone else on this podcast episode that has been thinking about the same thing for about almost coming up on probably about over a year and a half to almost 2 years, and kind of started in January of 2023. Yeah, kind of started solidifying, but it takes a long time to figure all that stuff out. So don't beat yourself up. We'll keep we'll have a artistic curiosity support group going. So
And the more immediate, actually, this weekend, I'm giving a talk, an hour-long presentation on the several liberal arts and sciences. And then I'm putting together the presentation on Masonic lessons in Taoism from the Tao Te Ching. And I'm refining my Kabbalism talk, but I'm constantly writing new talks and presentations. I give education presentations at the Blue Lodge level at multiple Blue Lodges, and for Grand Lodge of Nebraska Education Committee. I put together a presentation specifically for chapter, council, commandery, SRICF, and then also allied Masonic degrees. So I'm writing, and Scottish Rite. I'm the education
what?
committee.
No Night Masons? You forgot Night Masons?
So
You forgot York Rock College? You forgot?
I know Knight Masons does not exist in Nebraska, but we are actually in the
Oh
paper.
yeah. I forgot about that.
We're
Yeah.
putting that together right now. Chartering
Y'all
the
asked
first
me.
Knight Mason in Nebraska right now.
That's
So
yeah.
I'm busy.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, we're gonna anyway. Okay.
I may be also chartering sort of Bunker Hill and Gordian Knot and Highlanders and some other groups. Yeah, I don't have enough on my plate.
Like I said earlier, hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a ritual addict.
If there's further if people like, do you want to join this group? This group, the only group I've really said no to so far is Sojourners. I'm like, do you have good degree work? I'm like, oh, once you've been at least 2 years, you get this brief initiation to Heroes of 76. I was like, so there's not really a Sojourners initiation? No, but we get dinner. My calendar's full of dinners. If you
Yeah.
got initiation, if you got further light and there's a good initiation ceremony, I'll sign up for it. Give me a dues card. I want to see your degree.
So
You don't
swerving
have
kind
any
of
degree
back
work.
into that. Swerving kind of back into that. One of the things that I like to ask is, do you consider yourself a mystic?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Um, I think when I was younger, I would definitively say yes. And as I get older and the imposter syndrome creeps in, I'm more hesitant to say so. But I think so. I think it's a big part of my identity, and it has been for decades. I think I could fairly call myself a mystic.
So why do you think that? Why do you think kind of you would, yeah, that's me, versus maybe someone else that would be like, no, I'm not.
Because none of us knows anything. At the end of the day, we have this brief moment of time that we get to exist on this earth, right? And the definition of a scholar is not necessarily somebody who is an expert that knows everything, but is somebody who is a student who's actually actively trying to learn. And I feel the same way about a mystic, that a mystic is not somebody that inherently knows the hidden mysteries of the world, that they know the divine aspects of how the universe operates and how it was created and our roles in it, and what lies beyond this life in this world. A mystic does not, to me, the term denotes somebody that has all this inherent knowledge and understanding, but is someone who is open to studying and trying to find that and figure it out. If you are on the path of trying to learn, if you are on the path of asking the difficult questions, if you've begun to pull at the tapestry and at least begun to unravel it, then I think you are a mystic. And it doesn't matter how far along the journey you are, or how confident you are, or what knowledge you've accumulated. If you step one foot on that path, I think it is safe to call yourself a mystic.
So let's rapid fire. Um, Patriarchs out of the Old Testament.
I'm sorry?
Mystic or we'll play mystic or not mystic. Noah, mystic or not mystic.
Oh, yes, he was.
Um, Enoch. These are kind of softball.
Absolutely. Arguably the biggest mystic of the Old Testament. Yeah.
Moses.
Moses, yes.
Abraham.
No, no, I think he actually took things at face value. He took things literally when he was a child.
Even with his encounter with Melchizedek, the high king of Salem.
So he was taught that late, and I think he was being taught a lesson. But I think when he was challenged by God to sacrifice his son, he just took it at face value very literally. Um, so Melchizedek, that encounter there, Melchizedek was a mystic, but I don't know if Abraham was.
Okay.
It,
What
also, I
about
think that we have a version of that that we in the high priest degree,
I
and
know.
we have to be very careful to know that the version of that we teach in Masonry is not what's actually in Scripture. It's slightly different.
Well, and that's where yeah, I always go. That's Masonic lore and
Masonic lore,
Bible studies
Red
different than
Cross to
Masonic
Constantine, when we
Masonic
get into that, we
ritual.
talk about all this stuff happened because Constantine was such a devout Christian. I'm like, well, was he?
Yeah,
Masonic lore says he was a very devout Christian.
yeah,
Historically, was he truly a devout Christian? That's another debate. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I'm sorry. Fire. I stopped your
No,
rapid.
you're good. You're
Go
good.
ahead.
So the other thing is okay. So King David.
Yes.
Okay.
So, what's interesting is that Solomon is credited with being wise, right? That Solomon is the one that we think is this just brilliant mind, and he did all this. David was in an unfortunate situation, and then David was. I'm sorry. It's supposed to be rapid fire. I think that
I love
David
it.
should get more credit. That David had blood on his hands and was in a difficult situation. But I do think that he had a spiritual vision for the temple that he conveyed to Solomon. We talk about Solomon being the architect and the creator of the temple, but David was the one that was that conferred the idea to him. The idea of the temple, God gave it to David, David gave it to Solomon, and I think we leave David out of that equation all too often.
I think all you need to do is read the Psalms that he wrote.
Okay.
Their true vision. To me, that's his true voice. That's his voice. And go read that. And my gosh, symbolism upon just packed, just nuclear powered, cosmically powered. um, let's see.
David does not get enough credit for mysticism and yeah, symbolism. Yeah, absolutely.
We don't have a lot. Well, this is kind of maybe. What about Jacob? What about Israel himself?
I don't know. So we know his journey, what happened to him. We don't have writings of his, and I don't know if I have enough to make an informed decision. It's interest. He's one of my favorite symbols. His story is interesting symbolically, but I don't know if his individual journey, if I know enough about him and his beliefs to feel that he was more a literal follower, if he was more spiritual and mystical, and I don't know. Am I missing something there? So
Jacob's ladder.
writings of his, right?
Not really, but Jacob's ladder and the way he and him wrestling with the angel of God, whatever.
That may have wrestled God, may have wrestled an angel. So Israel, Jacob's name turns to Israel because he who wrestled with God, right? So the Israelites effectively were a people that the people effectively wrestle with God. And that's
But
it's
they're engaged. You can't wrestle with somebody unless you're engaged.
yes, but I love that instead of just saying that whatever my pastor teaches me in a sermon, I have to take as dogmatic truth. That one of the things I love about Jewish mysticism and Judaism is that you are to challenge those things. That you're taught to read the scripture and come up with your own interpretation and think for yourself. And you're given the Talmud, you're given the commentary, and people, countless men, for thousands of years before you, they've been reading this and they've been trying to come up with their own interpretation and they've been trying to unravel this. And your thoughts are not inherently new, but you're still entitled to your thoughts, and you should go through that process of challenging these things and unraveling them and thinking about them. And to effectively wrestle with God. If you just take what you've been given on a platter at face value and never question it, I, yeah, I don't know. It's one of the things that really speaks to me about Judaism.
But at the same time, tolerance says you have the right to do that. You have the privilege of doing that. And that's what we want. We want those spaces and those width to work within ourselves. And I think, we need to be tolerant. Going back the other way.
Whatever your religious practice belief is, I've tried to make it a point of actually bringing it into my Royal Arch chapter because York Rite is seen as a Christian only organization. That's not true. Commandery is Christian only. But in my Royal Arch chapter in recent years, I brought in somebody who's a voodoo priest, somebody who is a Viking Norse pagan. I brought in a practicing alchemist, a guy that runs a New Age store. It's a very Zen Christian. Brought in people of all kinds of beliefs. Brought in a practitioner of Thelema, Buddhists, that I try to surround myself with comparative religion and say these are all valid, and I respect all of your beliefs and practices. Sometimes I just when I was saying that I don't understand. I guess I have trouble wrapping my mind around the people that just consume what is given to them and don't question it and don't try to find the deeper meaning. I don't. I struggle with understanding. You're right. I should be very careful I speak about that. I shouldn't say that their practice is wrong. I can't. I'm not in a place to say the practice is wrong. I just don't understand it.
I just kind of mentioned that because that's just kind of my whole philosophy right now. Being a Freemason for 25 years, being the age that I am, it's just like, hey, maybe a little bit bohemian, a little bit hippie, but hey, we're all just need to do our own thing and
100%.
be happy. I think that's kind of a certain maturity or whatever. You're like, hey, I've found myself. I've kind of awakened certain levels and different parts of me, and I'm okay with myself. So please stop trying to tell me who I and define for me who I am. And I think that's anyway. Okay, keep on going. Aaron,
Aaron,
Moses' brother, Aaron.
first royal high priest, absolutely.
You never know. What about Ezekiel? That's slam dunk.
Yeah, the Merkabah,
Ezekiel,
that Jewish mysticism that's all from his vision.
yeah. Daniel, slam dunk.
Yeah.
That's a 2 inch putt, right? That's pretty much there. Who else would we say? I would say the Apostle Paul.
Yes. Uh,
And I would even think Peter to a certain point. They practice it differently, but Peter wanted to see beyond the veil. He wanted to see the unseen, the hidden world. He wanted to experience it.
Speak about that. Moses had a relationship with God and he saw the burning bush, but then he wanted to look upon the actual body of God, not just the burning bush, that he
Yeah.
wanted to have a deeper understanding to see God. And he asked God to pass through the valley so he could look at him. The gospel, if we start getting into the apostles and there's a difference between Old Testament prophets that they had more of a conversation with God, would challenge God and advocate. And in New Testament prophets eventually just say, I'm going to write down what I'm told by God. And the relationship changes, but I look at the Apostle John and the Gospel of John, and John is aimed at the Greeks and Greek philosophers. And there is a depth and a symbolism in John that I really love. And I didn't, when I was a kid, Luke is what spoke to me. As an adult and as a Mason, and studying esoteric aspects of my life, John really, really speaks to me the most now.
Gospel of John, and then Revelation also. John the John the evangelist, not John the baptizer. But he speaking of mystics, John the baptizer.
So I find him fascinating, and I point to a certain example of his life all the time. Is that he is arguably the most devout person to have ever walked the earth other than Jesus himself, right? That he knew definitively knew so devout in his faith that he was the one to prepare the way and tell everyone about Jesus before anyone saw the miracles, before anyone knew. He just knew in his heart and was convincing everyone, right? John the Baptist, so devout that this is the absolute example, the archetype of devout faith. And towards the end of his life, he's in jail, he's waiting to be executed, and he asked Jesus to come visit him one last time. And he's like, "Hey, was I right? Was I right to teach what I taught? Was I right to believe in you? Was I right to put my faith in you?" And the guy that was just the absolute pillar of faith and of his whole life is filled with doubt at the end, and Jesus reassures him. And it speaks to me of the human experience that to have faith is not that you just know inherently something is definitively true, but to wrestle with that doubt and choose to believe. Because we can't know anything definitively to be true. We choose to believe that it is true. And if John is about as devout and as perfect and as holy as a person could be, if he is struggling with doubt in his end days, then I don't feel guilty if in my own imperfections in my spiritual journey that I can wrestle with these things and say I'm not a perfect man, I'm a sinner, and I have moments of doubt and I don't know. I'm trying to find my path. And if he can struggle, then I can struggle too. But at the end, you choose to double down and you still choose to believe.
So Joseph, son of Jacob.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I was.
Egyptian, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
thought we were.
Multicolored
Just,
coat.
I assumed like
Joseph,
people like
Joseph, the
Joseph and
multicolored
Mary.
coat. Joseph of Rich. I'm kind of going back. I'm kind of
I'm sorry, it took me a minute. I was like, Joseph and Mary? Just yes, yes, absolutely. So he was a prophet and had visions and would interpret dreams and find the meanings of what's interesting is that he wasn't just conveying and saying, I had this dream. Joseph in particular, a lot of the prophets are basically saying, hey, I'm telling you the vision I saw. He was actually someone who would interpret people's dreams and tell people what the meanings were. He could find the symbolism. He especially we knew to be a mystic, yeah.
Zerubbabel.
So I'm trying to separate the Masonic lore from what's actually in Scripture. I still think that there's enough in Scripture there. Masonic lore, and again, I just want to be very careful about paints a certain picture of him that's definitively. But I think even there's enough in Scripture. There's also non-canonical books. Like a lot of our Masonic degrees in Knight Masonry and elsewhere, we pull from like Esdras, these books that are not in a canon Bible today. If you pull,
Apocryphy.
huh?
Apocryphy.
Yeah, yeah. So if you pull from some of that other stuff, I think that there's plenty to show that Zerubbabel is a mystic.
Yeah. Okay, that was fun. I hadn't done that with anybody yet. I think that might incorporate that, especially the way you and I kind of align on what we see things. So, would you label or describe yourself as an esotericist?
I think so. I think that there's certain baggage, particularly in the Masonic community. You know, there's people I think that you can go so deep to get confirmation bias of I'm just going to keep mining at this until I get the interpretation I want, or I think, hey, I'm going to go 20 layers deep that this means this, it means this. That I think you have to be very, very careful with the perception and the connotation of that term. But I do think that we should kind of bring it back and maybe rescue it. It's unfortunate that it sometimes has a romanticism of these people believe what they want to believe, that whether or not that there is enough conjecture there that there's enough reason to believe those things. And I think we have to be very careful in the esoteric field not to just jump into blind conjecture, that we need to find that there's a basis, that there is a reasoning, that something supports that interpretation and speaks to us and points us in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you back it up by scripture, you back it up by, and that's where I think you got to start in any of this with you have to be initiated into the ritual and you have to consume the ritual and you have to own it at a certain level. Like I've done, And that's where I think that's what we're propagating in this conversation, this chat. So, um, what would you say is your biggest inspiration, or one of your top ones? I mean, it's kind of a way.
I find inspiration in all kinds of things all the time. I could just point to like individuals like that I didn't meet, like Terry Fox as as a kid who's dying and running across Canada to raise money for other kids that not just because he did something that was difficult, but the selflessness to think, hey, I'm in a bad situation instead of trying to find comfort or woe is me, that he's saying, I understand how bad this suffering is, and I want to make sure no other kid goes through this. And so I'm going to dedicate my last remaining lives to do right by others. We've talked about a lot of scriptural figures, and there's a lot of great people that we can talk about, Job, the story of Job or whatever, something like that. But I try to find inspiration in the people around me and actual real figures and there's people I can name that you would know and the listeners of the podcast would know. Steve Barkus is one of my favorite mentors in Masonry. And I try to look at some of the struggles. He's had to put a kid in the grave, and he's had kids with a lot of medical issues, and he's had all kinds of struggles, and yet he just has this great capacity in his heart for love and to continue to be a servant leader and to give back to the fraternity decades and decades later. That he sat in East a million bodies, and he doesn't care about titles. He just cares about doing right for others and continuing to mentor people up and lift people up. And I look for those people around me. And when life deals me a bad set of cards and a bad situation, and I'm struggling and life is difficult, I look to those people and I say, if they have the strength to continue on, to continue to do the right people, if they continue to have a capacity for compassion, for consideration, for servant leadership, then I can find that strength in myself to continue to try and exercise, patience and tolerance and servant leadership and compassion and consideration. That's where I find inspiration is the capacity for kindness in humans. When we hear bad things all the time, the internet, social media, we're surrounded with negativity. We're surrounded by a partisan society to tell you hate the other half of the country and that the other half of the country are all bad people. That instead of finding the things that divide us, I look for those that are trying to unite people, and I look for those that are trying to be helpers and protectors. Um, and I find that stuff around me all the time. It's reassuring.
So that's great, and wow, I mean, I think that's shows a certain amount of maturity, and that you've self-actualized and you've looked at things, and then kind of how do I measure up to the world, and what do I want to portray to the world? What would you say is your biggest inspiration, maybe an inspiration for what you're doing now in Freemasonry, kind of all your educational pursuits and trying to, just help others on their path and being that principal soldier, that kind of guide in that kind of role.
Um, I
And
think
yeah. Good. And who, yeah, and maybe if there's someone, whether they're kind of local or maybe someone on the national level that's
local people, Matthew Parkhurst, when I was asked to be the head of the education committee, I immediately said, he's got to be my co-chair. I respect him so much, and I find inspiration in him. Your particular interpretations of the capitular degrees, again, really speak to me because those are my favorite
thank you. I
degrees.
appreciate that.
And I think that you've really mined that well and found some stuff that really speaks to me. I look at particular, like I think that some of the people you've lined up, I don't want to just be completely self-promoting, but this San Antonio convention, like Ben Williams, I've gone down to Colorado to hear him talk, and I've heard him present at the SRCF and other organizations at High Council, and had some great conversations with him. He's a guy that really inspires me. That he takes topics that I think that I he talks about, say, astronomy and alchemy and things that probably wouldn't speak to me a lot otherwise. I like to think that the stars don't control my fate. I control my fate. And he's convinced me to revisit these topics with an open mind and see certain lessons and some value in these topics that I wouldn't find value in otherwise. And he's caused me to challenge in my own opinions and biases and perspectives and look at things in a different way. And he has found some really interesting meat on those bones and just found a lot of actual real depth that I didn't think was necessarily there. And so I'm really inspired by some of the work that he's been doing. I think that he's going to be a fantastic speaker. I'm really excited to hear him speak in San Antonio.
Yeah, which would be June 2025, San Antonio Esoteric Summit. We're gonna start promoting how to register for that. Got some details to work through. Um, so what would you say is your creative process?
Ooh, procrastinate, and by the power of wait till the 11th hour with my ADHD, because I can't get my brain to focus until when I want to. If I could channel the hyper focus, for those of you who don't have ADHD, as I'm playing with fidgets and so on and so forth and doing everything else, while I'm talking to you, I can't get my brain to concentrate on what I need to. Executive function doesn't allow me to do what I need to in a timely manner. But eventually, my back against the wall at the 11th hour, and then suddenly my brain goes into hyper focus, and I become such an excellent writer and a creator at the 11th hour. That Cobbleston presentation that you were impressed by, I wrote in a single day.
Oh,
Uh,
I remember. I remember you saying that either. I think you said it after. Like I think we were kind of doing the Q&A at the end, and or I kind of talked to you about it, and whenever I approached you about some of the things that we were working on together, yeah, that was like I was like, wow.
I'm a
But you knew that stuff though. That's what I'm getting at. You own that knowledge. You've studied that for 40 something years of your life, kind of at a certain level.
So I was doing a presentation for Council of Cryptic Masons, right? And I wrote something an hour before the meeting. I just did a 5 minute thing. I whipped out 1,500 words in like an hour, right? And I show up to council and I do this presentation. And this gentleman turns to me afterwards and says, well, where did you get all this information, right? About Enoch's temple and the pillars between Enoch's temple and Alpha and Omega and how we actually mirror and have duality and how these things actually pay off again. And he's like, where did you get all this stuff? He said, what books did you find? I was like, this is just stuff I knew. This is from just reading the Bible. This is just from like looking into scripture and looking at stuff and reading other texts over the years. And I was like, I just kind of mined this from the back of my head.
Yeah, and it's also from those of us who have been privileged to be in appendant bodies, invitational bodies, and it's something that I meant to say earlier, speaking of inspirations and tipping the cap to people that we look up to and that have mentored us. Robert G. Davis, Bob Davis out of Oklahoma. He says, you've got to, he goes, people have asked him, well, would you want to be Scottish Rite or York Rite? He's like, well, I am a big York Rite Mason. You think of me as Scottish Rite from certain, if you don't, if you're, and a lot of times I think I've seen him on one particular podcaster. So, this is like a couple of years ago, and they're trying to get him to say, well, I would go, and he actually goes, I would go York Rite. And so he said, you need all of it. You start with the 3 lessons and the 3 degrees in the Blue Lodge. It builds to the chapter, the council, and if you so choose, the commandery. Then probably the Scottish Rite, 4th through the 32nd degree, are going to make a lot more sense to you. And so he goes, you need all of that information just to kind of get enough to where you can start seeing dots to connect them. Puzzle pieces.
So I like Kabbalism, the Scottish Rite, particularly Southern jurisdiction and modern Scottish Rite. It's very heavily, it's Albert Pike's interpretation of Kabbalism. Kabbalism runs rich through it. I agree with Bob Davis, though, and I've only met him briefly at a high council in Louisville a couple times. I don't know him very well. I'd like to know him a lot better.
We'll take care of that in February if he's
Okay.
there.
He's fantastic. But I completely agree with him that I think actually you want to understand Freemasonry, go study the York Rite and you'll understand Freemasonry. I think the York Rite is poorly run, that we offer ritual and not much else, that we're not doing education enough, we're not doing fun stuff, that York Rite, at local level, the state levels, the highest level of Grand Chapter, General Grand Chapter, Grand Council, Grand Cabinet actually puts some good education programs. I don't think that York Rite sells itself or markets itself or operates itself well. They're setting on the best damn degrees. The Scottish Rite is so well run and they sell themselves well and they market themselves well and they know how to run an organization. When people like, which one should I join? And I'm like, go see the degree work first. I said, you'll probably enjoy the Scottish Rite more. You will enjoy being an active Scottish Rite Mason more. But go watch the York Rite degrees first, please. I don't care if you demit immediately after. The first thing you should do after you're raised as a Master Mason is go see those York Rite degrees.
You can't be a full fellowcraft without the Mark Master degree.
Yeah, I'm with you.
You
And
can't complete your Solomonic journey without the most excellent master's degree. So, we're not turning this into a York Rite episode. We can do one of those, but
I love them all.
yeah.
Where is
So
it? My sidewalk with some of my other I've got a giant stack of dues cards from a whole bunch of bodies. I'm active in 30 some odd bodies. This is not a different dues card for every year. This is like I have like 36 dues cards of like 36 active organizations. I mean, I join them all. I love them all. But go see the York Rite degrees first. And I agree with Bob Davis.
so kind of on that same vein, do you have any particular media, such as a type of music, a favorite band, maybe a movie or a book or something? You're like, I want to write something, I need to complete something. I'm going to put this on YouTube or put this on in the background to kind of help me kind of get in that zone where it's just me and this subject matter and I'm just going to nail it.
Yeah, and this may sound weird, but
The
video.
trigger to launch you kind of in that creativity.
So I like listening to stuff that is instrumental and has connotations that is familiar, and I have positive experiences with it, emotional experiences with it. So I will take my favorite video game soundtracks or my favorite movie soundtracks, instrumental scores,
Mhm.
and I will put instrumental music back on. And Rachmaninoff is great. Beethoven's great. I'm not going to put Beethoven on when I'm trying to write. It just doesn't speak to me in that level. But I have a certain connotation to listening to the Skyrim score or Morrowind or Zelda or Final Fantasy or whatever, or a great film score, Requiem for a Dream or so on and so forth, or something like that, The Last of the Mohicans, some Star Wars film scores or whatever. Listen to some instrumental music, and I feel like it just activates a portion of my brain. There have been some studies that some people have questioned about playing instrumental classical music for children at a very young age or babies, and does it activate a portion of the brain? But that's what I channel. So
I
when
think I
I
think I think I think me and you and maybe and we'll let Rodney talk here in a minute. But for me, I think Dark Side of the Moon
Ooh,
would be probably a good thing that probably infants need to listen to. But that's for me. That's Pink Floyd, Grateful Dead, The Doors, just that kind of music whenever it kind of jams and everything. And then also maybe one thing that I don't know if you've ever tried this or whatever, but I love going. I actually have a playlist and kind of sectioned off on YouTube the different monohertz, megahertz um, frequencies, and whenever they're doing those, just kind of those tones and those frequencies and stuff, very similar to what you're talking about, very instrumental and just kind of sounds, and they're supposed to help you unlock your study mode and things like that, focus mode. So,
those are all great bands. More modern stuff that I really, really like. And also the band is very into the esoteric. Maynard James Keenan, he's got three major bands, Tool, Perfect Circle, and Pucifer. He is, I think, a student of the Rosicrucians stuff that he talks about in his lyrics, and actually the drummer Dana Carey and the band, he's got like John Dee's Monad, like he's got actual just straight up Rosicrucian symbolism on his drum set.
yeah.
Their music is full of that type of stuff, and so I like listening to that if I want to get into that mindset, that mentality as well. And so if you're not familiar with like Tool and the Perfect Circle, I highly recommend them. They are kind of more modern metal industrial. Uh, I wouldn't put them in a genre. They're almost like Pink Floyd. That like what genre is Pink Floyd? Um,
Pink
Tool,
Floyd. It's
yeah,
like ZZ Top. Where's ZZ Top? Oh, it's ZZ Top.
Tool is very unique and they
Yeah.
are their own genre. Some people say like I wouldn't call them metal, but I don't know what else you call Tool other than Tool. Tool is about as unique as it gets. And one of my favorite things is pulling up a YouTube video of an expert, a music expert, listening to Tool for the first time and watch their mind blown. Yeah, that's great stuff.
So my addition to that would be some guys out of Texas. They're from Houston, most of them, but then they're kind of in the Austin scene, and their name is Uncle Lucius.
Write this down.
Their album that you would want to go probably check them out. Not a lot of their hits are off of that, but it's called The Light.
The Light, Uncle Lucius.
Yeah,
Get a note here.
there's all kinds of different things that you and I like to kind of check out. A lot of themes there and a lot of lyrics and things like that. Um, so what do you think motivates you to get kind of, you talked about your great partnership that you have and just being buddies with Matthew Parker and just the way y'all collaborate and what do you think you get out of that collaborative agreement, with what we're trying to build here, to kind of recreate projects and that you're pursuing and how do you feel about that? And when do you feel it's more fulfilling to kind of be in a duet versus a solo artist?
So I think it's always good to get an outside perspective. And so early on, in particular, we'd run each other's pieces past each other for editing and proofreading, but also comments and outside perspective. We haven't been doing that as much lately, and I need to probably get back to that and do more of that of running our pieces past each other for more of that feedback. I think anytime you can challenge yourself with an outside perspective, and so I think you want to surround yourself with people that have similar pursuits and are somewhat similar mindset, but give you a different perspective. And so I really love having that relationship to challenge myself and to see things in a different way and to get his unique outlook on things. And it's one of the things I'm really excited about of going to Summit is not just excellent speakers and hearing excellent speakers, but going to meet some people that I've never met before and establish more of those connections. Because I think that anytime that you can collaborate or get different vantage points and ideas, it enriches and challenges your mind. We were talking earlier about, the church and masonry, is this stuff compatible? I think sometimes, and also, surrounding yourself with people of different faiths. One of my favorite things in Freemasonry is sitting in a room of very intelligent men of good character who have different beliefs than me and hearing those different beliefs and not feeling challenged or that they're putting their beliefs on me, but it actually strengthens and refines my own beliefs. And it's one of the things I truly love about the fraternity.
Yeah, I've gotten the privilege by the blessing of a Jewish Freemason buddy of mine. He took me whenever he lives in Houston, and I was around him. And on a Friday night, we went to Shabbat together. We went to the Sabbath. We went to synagogue and Reform down in Clear Lake by NASA, and it blew me away. I think that's kind of one of the, kind of me answering my own question, but kind of going back to where did I get this affinity for Judaism and this kind of, openness to it, and I think that would be for me. So yeah, you gotta pick those things out. So what else do you like about the collaborative side of things?
When I run into a wall and I'm like, I'm not sure how to proceed, and I just get a mental block as I get older. I don't know if it's just post-COVID brain or I'm just getting older. Sometimes I struggle to think of names or words or and you just hit a wall and you just step away and revisit it or run it past somebody else to kind of get the creative juices flowing again. And they'll ask a question about what about seeing it from this way or this angle? What if you did this? And so anytime you can get an outside perspective on your work, it helps refines and improves your work. In filmmaking, there's this concept of auteur theory that the director is the single author, that it doesn't matter if 400 people worked on a film, that the director had the final say in every single thing that occurs and what eventually ends up on celluloid. So the director is the sole creator and the sole author, and everyone else is really kind of subservient to that. And there is a film school theory that maybe that's true, but I think that's a horrible process and a horrible outlook to take. That at the end of the day, I personally really prefer collaborative creative processes. And I think that you end up with a better result.
Encouraged collaborative creative processes.
Yes.
So much fun. I always say that I want to be kind of have a nickname of being the Willie Nelson of Masonic kind of esoteric symbolism kind of educational collaborators. Just all, Willie will sing a song with anybody. Willie will jump in and be featured on anybody's thing, and that's kind of a cool thing. But if you had the magical ability to transform the culture of Freemasons by amplifying, excuse me, the culture of Freemasonry by amplifying the Freemasons, what would you have? What would that look like? Like, what would, let's say you are TJ, the galactic cosmic ruler, and so um, what would you say that looks like?
I would like to see more esoteric minded Masons, and I'd like to see people and things of that nature because that's what connects with me. But I think if I really could change the culture, the one thing that I would change is mentorship. And I would encourage, and I don't want to get back to just operational of how you make a lodge grow and members and things of that nature. But if you want to teach people and start them on a path, if you just initiate someone and maybe that initiation didn't resonate with them and they don't understand the symbolism, and they've only been to a handful of meetings before they get to their third degree and they're like, now what? And a lot of times they're just like, oh, it's up to you. Go figure it out on your own. And I think a lot of people never get to really start down that journey to seeing the depth that is there or to understanding the value that Freemasonry offers because the initial steps aren't there. I think if we would just take a little bit of mentorship to say, hey, what are you interested in? What questions did you have? Why did you have these questions? And can I point you in the right direction and show you if you
And
could?
then I think the most positive thing you can do is be
Yes.
quiet and pause and just be like, listen. Don't be thinking of an answer. Don't be thinking of the next thing to say. I think that's what you're implying, right?
Absolutely. One of the controversial things we did in Nebraska is we recently just went from short form to where there's like almost no proficiency requirement. You can do all 3 degrees in a day, make someone amazing immediately, to go back to long form that the candidates have to memorize the full Q&A to progress. And it's very controversial. I won't get into the pros and cons and the whole argument. But the thing that is getting me is actually there's a whole bunch of lodges saying, I don't want to mentor. I don't want to put in the time. I've been a Mason for 20 years. I've already put in time. Why should I have to go mentor someone? And why should I have to help candidates out? And there's a lot of lodges struggling. The lodges that do mentor the candidates that come through this, that you spend more time with them and you're explaining the ritual and then and getting to memorize the Q&A. They've asked them questions like, what is this word? What does this mean? And you take a little bit of time of actually lead them on the journey and teach them a few things. The people that come out at the end of that are so much better. And I get the pros and cons of both sides of the argument of membership and the people that get turned away and memorization does not define a Mason. But it saddens me when people don't want to mentor and help the new guys. And I think that if memorization is a good thing or a bad thing and all that aside, if you take a little bit of time to open their minds a little bit and get them questioning and get them thinking and starting down that path, it's such a powerful and wonderful thing. So if I could change anything in the culture of Masonry, it would be to encourage the old curmudgeons to be more willing and apt to mentor and continue to serve the craft by helping the new candidates.
Saddle soap on the saddle.
Yeah,
Moisten up. Hey, let's get Rodney in here for a few questions.
I'm
He's
excited.
he's ready to go. There he is in the laboratory. He's been
Hey
he's
there.
been He's been wailing away there.
What a wonderful conversation you guys have been having. I've been enjoying listening in the background.
Thanks.
Um, I come from a esoteric background myself. I came from certain schools of thought like the Golden Dawn and groups of that nature, and that's what brought me to Masonry. And instead of those like that delve into Masonry, then get into those specific groups. So I came into the fraternity with an esoteric mind, and I was hesitant on joining Masonry when I did right before I did join, due to the fact I thought it was an old man's club, just a social club, and I thought it was didn't really offer much esoteric thought. And I was pleasantly surprised after I joined. I met a few local brothers that you guys most likely know that are really heavily involved with esoteric thought, and it's definitely growing from there. And I'm knowing or realizing a lot of the younger guys that are joining are extremely hungry for esotericism.
So it's
So,
go ahead.
what did we not cover with TJ so far? Or what would you want to know more about? Maybe.
Well, I was gonna ask you, with newer membership really hungry for that esoteric philosophy, at least locally, there's not really a route to engage in that within Masonry. Have you noticed that's a similar pathway or I guess lack thereof over there where you're from?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm also the secretary of the college for the SRICF, Societas Rosicruciana and Civitatis Federatis, and we've been at SRCF meeting tomorrow. And it's an invitational body, and I almost wish it wasn't invitational. That when I was doing an education symposium or Grand Lodge education symposium, and I was doing a presentation 3 months ago or something like that, and I had a bunch of young Masons there, and they're just like, "Man, this stuff's exciting. Where do I go to learn about this? Where do I go to study about this? Where do I find other Masons who are like-minded to study this?" And all I just said to him is, "I may have a door for you. I may have something for you." I couldn't tell him what yet, and I got to go talk to people, and I got to approve them, and I got to bring in these people to invite them. I do wish that there were open avenues within Masonry that was obvious. I think maybe we wouldn't struggle with membership as much because this doesn't appeal to everybody, and not everyone wants this in their Blue Lodge, and I get that. But I do wish that there were very clear open avenues that any interested, aspiring, hungry mind could clearly go and say, where do I find this group of people, and how do I be able to engage in these conversations and study these subjects? And it saddens me when we kind of hide some of this behind closed doors in invitational bodies.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
It
Uh,
also it seems like it's hard to really grasp all the material within the ritual that we have if you don't have a general understanding of esoteric philosophy and the study of what's behind the symbolism.
It also saddens me a little bit that are you familiar with the 27th degree of the Scottish Rite?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Uh, it's not done in most valleys, and then it's also done late in the process. So like you're getting this the 27th degree, and I'm like, well, this should have been at the beginning. Like you're telling people, here's how to actually approach things. Here's how to study and understand symbolism. Here's how to communicate these lessons. Here's how to kind of dissect it and look for the meat on the bone. And it's kind of sad that the degree is rarely conferred, or that it's done so late. And I wish that we had stuff like that earlier in the Masonic journey to get people's minds opened up. And it'd be almost nice to put together presentations that you can travel to launches and give a something like a mini version of that. Take one of the lectures, just take the monologue on gematria from the 27th degree and just say, I'm going to open your mind on one particular concept, and let's talk about this. And then see who that excites and say, let's now have a follow-up conversation after that. I do think that maybe we need to bottle up elevator pitches of some of this stuff and get it out there. And maybe this podcast is a way to find some of those people.
yeah, that's what I was going to say to answer Rodney's question is why don't you just start your own kind of unofficial side group? I mean, there's nothing against it if everybody's initiated to a certain level and privileged to the information and well, how's that different than sitting next to someone while you're doing a pre or post degree meeting meal. No different. So it's always, and that's what we hope that everything that we're doing in our production company, Once Lost, Now Found, is podcasts that just kind of capture the conversations that we get to have and share those in kind of a more public form and kind of give people maybe what they're not finding immediately geographically restricted in their area. And so, what else, Rodney? Do you think that you want to know from TJ while we got his attention?
Well, have you ever been part of another esoteric organization besides what's connected specifically with Masonry?
Yes. Well, I'm a Rosicrucian, but the Rosicrucian organization I'm in is connected to Masonry. Beyond that, I can say that I am a Martinist, and that's an organization we generally don't really talk about. And I can't say that anyone else is a Martinist. I can't say who initiated me, and I really can't say anything about Martinism, but you can identify yourself as a Martinist. I will say that my Martinist initiation and my SRSCF initiations were in many ways what I was looking for in Masonry and didn't find in the Blue Lodge. And Blue Lodge Masonry is important. And it's great. I don't want to put Blue Lodge Masonry down. I'm a custodian. I do like make sure everyone's ritual is good and ritual proficient. I go support people degrees. Next week, I'm gonna go out help another Master Mason degree. But those other organizations, in a way, cycle back and they feed into, and they actually enrich. Being a member of all three has enhanced my appreciation of all three organizations, the way that they dovetail into each other, and sometimes ritual in one of them makes me revisit and ask questions about ritual in another. And so there's one particular small nugget in Blue Lodge Masonry to say that you return to the place for the from which you came there, reinvested of that which you've been divested, and the ritual may be slightly different in Texas or wherever. But that line, at face value, doesn't say much in Blue Lodge Masonry. But once I experienced something in another body, it made me go back and see that in a completely different context and ask questions of like, oh, wait, returning to the place from whence I came and being reinvested, which I was divested of. What if that has a symbolic and much deeper meaning? And what if there's a lot more of those little nuggets in our degree work and our ritual that are very easy to overlook, but potentially have a powerful esoteric message?
I fully agree, and good hearing that from you. I've come to the same conclusions myself. These other esoteric organizations are great supplemental organizations. They give you deeper meanings of symbols that you could bring into the fraternity and look at things through a different lens. My main background is like through alchemy, so I see Freemasonry heavily through an alchemical lens, and I see elements of alchemy pretty much in everything now in Masonry, and you can see that in various other thoughts.
I like spiritual alchemy. I don't practice physical alchemy, but it's interesting. Like the third grade of the SRCF talks about the value of both, not to discount them. And actually, the lecture of the third grade was the first time that the SRCF really clicked with me. I like the Zealotry initiation, and I love conferring that for other people. Again, great initiatic experience. But I was like, is this organization for me? And it was actually the lecture that third grade that suddenly it made sense and it really started clicking, and I was like, oh yeah, I like this. And I think that I find a lot of value in studying conceptual spiritual alchemy.
Oh, there's a lot of fruit there, and I practice both speculative and operative alchemy, and they definitely go hand in hand. I'm primarily originally a student of Carl Jung, so he's the godfather of speculative or spiritual alchemy. So I fully can relate to what you're saying.
It's he's someone that I wish that I had hooked onto earlier in life. And so I took a psychology class in high school, and they're like, oh, well, he came up with introvert and extrovert and some, archetypical theories about personalities, and he put people in these divisions in his camps. Like, no, oh my God. he was talking about some deeply spiritual topics, and it's interesting that he was a scientist and but a man of faith as well, and that some of the stuff he wrote, man, God, I wish I discovered when I was younger, and I wish that I'd realized. And actually, one of the things that the biggest misconception that really bugs me is everyone says I'm definitively an introvert or an extrovert, and Jung said, actually, no, most people are ambiverts. You go through phases where in an individual moment you are recharged by this, and you're in an individual moment you're recharged by this. Your needs wax and wane, but most people are probably not 100% always an introvert or 100% always an extrovert. And once we assign a label to a person, they start changing their behavior to adapt to that label. But that's not what he was talking about. He was actually talking about most people are ambiverts, and we have to understand what we need, and our needs change from moment to moment. Um, Oh,
He's almost kind of
I'm ranting, but he is so good.
he's kind of alluding to that prima materia that everybody has, and it teeters like back and forth.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, his grandfather was a Grand Master of Freemasons over there in Zurich back when he was alive, and it's still a speculation on whether Carl Jung himself was a Freemason, but there's really no evidence.
Y'all are getting all esoteric up in here.
He might have been in other organizations that weren't Freemasonry as well, too. So he may have been in other esoteric fraternal orders.
Right? I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, uh,
I'm gonna write a note. That's a presentation I need to write for my college.
oh, like you mean what other organizations he might be part of aside from possibly Freemasonry, or
All right, no, just about teaching some of the spiritual esoteric lessons that Carl Jung taught. I think a lot of people are only familiar with his psychology and his philosophy, and so they mainly know him from the psychology, and they know him from inventing introverts and extroverts and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of things that people don't know about him, and so just like an introduction to him and some of his other teachings, I think would be a good primer for the college. I like to basically introduce people to certain concepts and let them run with it. I don't want to teach them that this is the definitive gospel truth and my interpretation is definitively it. I like to dip people's toes in the water, get them excited, and let them run off to study these things. And so I got a guy in my college that he's never really been super interested in the esoteric, and he's not very knowledgeable. And he's in his 60s, and he's like, where do I start when I've never looked into this before? And I was like, well, you're deeply Christian, but you've never looked at esoteric. You take stuff at very face value. And I said, well, what I want you to do is start with John chapter 1. That is part of the Zealot grade. That every Rosicrucian should be familiar with John chapter 1. And I said, I want you to take John chapter 1. I want you to look at the original Greek translation of it. I want you to look up the concept of logos, and I want you to meditate on it. I want you to think about this and come to your own interpretation and digest this and look for new meaning in this. You're familiar with the Gospels, but I want you to look for a deeper meaning than you would look for before in John chapter 1. And sent him off, and he came back. Oh, you wouldn't believe what I found. So instead of me telling him what I think John chapter 1 means and me telling him what the concept of logo is, I got him excited to study it for himself and come to his own interpretation. And so I like giving people intro basic stuff.
And I think you hit on something that I kind of make a joke of. People come to me and when I get a chance to facilitate discussion or give my interpretations or educate, whatever, however you want to define whatever I'm trying to give back, or do. For me, a lot of times they come up and they're like they're so thankful and all this kind of stuff, and I'm just like, okay, well, if you're inspired tonight or online or today or whatever, I said the greatest thing you can do for me, the only, especially if I spoke for free, right? I'm not getting paid to speak, is just what stood out to you, and then what are you going to do with it? Like, if there's something that I encourage you to do or recommended, try it out. Go do it. Like what you're talking about. I think that's what we all, the three of us are kind of known for doing, facilitating this discussion and not saying this is the way and saying, here's some things to think about. And you just gotta, those that have ears to hear and those that have eyes will see type thing, right? And But I think for me, it's something that you said there was giving people, and I was encouraged because right at first when I started kind of doing this, and David Bendel, my buddy here in Texas, he, he and I were talking about developing some study guides and some different things for some different organizations. And he's like, "Yeah, but you can't, Jeff, you can't give them everything that you know. You got to hold something back. You need to like give them some space, like these other people have given you some space to find things." Speaking of another David in Texas, David Hill, along with Rodney, would be someone as you're developing your thoughts that you just this presentation. He's an actual practicing therapist that has studies and certifications and degree actual not like actual real world degrees in the theory of and philosophies and teachings of Carl Jung. So I'll connect you up with him. He's a great guy. What else, Rodney?
I
We've
got,
covered a
I got
lot.
one final question, and then I've got to take off soon because it's getting pretty late here in Indiana. Um, have you had any backlash being an esoteric Freemason over there, with fellow members that are Masons as well as maybe your Grand Lodge throughout the years?
Yes. So some people said, hey, we don't want educational presentations in Lodge, or we don't want them on certain subject material. We don't want them of a certain length. The moment I was appointed to do the committee, be the chair of the education committee for Grand Lodge of Nebraska, I had a past master said, I don't want any symbolism. I don't want any esoteric stuff. Grand Lodge Education Committee needs to tell people how to take care of their building and how to run a lodge, and how to pay their bills. And
How to do one of them audits? Make sure the books are straight. Make sure the money's all in the right spots.
I try not to be dismissive of that feedback, and I try to know my audience, and it depends that there are certain lodges you can go to where the membership and the culture of that lodge, maybe that there's a certain egregore and there's a certain atmosphere and culture in that lodge where people are very open-minded and thirsty and interested in certain topics. And then there's ones where they're not. And that's fine. Every lodge has its own culture. I have gotten a little bit of that. My lodge had two preparation rooms for candidates, and one would become a storage room and weren't really using it. Generally, we didn't have multiple candidates at the same time, or we were getting fewer and fewer candidates through. And I was like, now we got the second room. If I clear out the storage here, we don't need the second preparation room most of the time. What if I turn this into a chamber of reflection? And Grand Lodge is like, no, we don't want any of that. We don't want people meditating on these symbols and doing that. That's a innovation to work, and it's changing. And Grand Lodge, told me that I pretty much could not do, and not 100% outlawed, but they really didn't want anyone in Nebraska doing a chamber of reflection. And I think being mindful and trying to prepare for initiation and getting into a certain mindset and contemplating symbols only enriches the experience. I think it's a really good idea, but not some of the Grand Lodges are excited about it. I'm excited. I'm grateful that there are other organizations that are more esoterically minded for those that are interested in them. I just wish that they were sometimes more visible and the paths to them were easier for people to find. It's nice that I'm the secretary of the college, so I can get people invited and I can get people in the door and get people into the SRCF. I wish that that was the case more often in more places.
I agree, and I could kind of feel like an esoteric enlightenment going on within the fraternity, and that concept is growing. So maybe things will gradually start changing in that regard. Especially like with the chamber reflection. I think that's one of the most important things missing with the entered apprentice degree in America.
Yeah, my pitch was to basically say, well, okay, I can't alter the EA degree and ritual, right? But if this is something that is completely before it, and this ends before the EA degree starts, I'm not changing the EA ritual. This is just, I can do a dinner before my EA degree, right? We can talk, we can, whatever. Why can't I do something that's completely, if I make it a disconnected thing, and I make it optional. I don't force the candles to go through it, but I explain this is something that may prepare you and may enhance your experience. It's an optional thing if you would like to do this. They do it completely before and optionally. And then once that's done, we do the EA degree exactly as the cipher says, exactly as our ritual and our custodian says, and we don't deviate from the EA ritual. But an optional thing that is completely separated but before. That's a way I can technically get it through rules, but I still got to sell people on it. There's only one lodge, I think, the entire state that does a chamber of reflection right now, and I'd like to maybe be the second.
That would be a good education piece. Just start spreading the word on what the Chamber of Reflection represents. A lot of people probably don't even know what that is since we don't practice that, or I mean, include it.
You know what? I think the Grand Lodge Education Committee might be doing another note. We'll see if that pisses somebody off, but I think I'm going to rate that. We'll see how it goes.
Very good. Well, Jeff, do you have any final discussion or final words?
Well, couple things. Thank you, TJ, for coming on, working this into your loaded schedule. Thank you, Rodney, for everything that you do to help us get these things together. Rodney is the one that, whenever this goes to final edit, he's the one that's mixed everything and gets to do all the tedious work behind the scenes. I kind of have the concept and kind of move it. We record, and then Rodney takes over from there. It's definitely speaking. Whenever I was actually reading you that question, I was thinking about him, about the collaborative, that kind of symbiotic, and where I'm strong, Rodney maybe gets a bumper from that, and vice versa. And yeah, and it's so much fun. We've had so much fun doing this just all the production work and just figuring out stuff and everything. So thanks, Rodney, immensely, eternally, from time immemorial, all that kind of good stuff. And I think the other thing, TJ, is I really appreciate your willingness to promote Freemasonry, to promote the things that we're trying to espouse here, and trying to bring up kind of in a positive way to the surface. And I think you're doing a great job of that. It's funny how many times you've dropped names that are on. This is early on. This is one of the first handful of episodes that we've done. And there's going to be a lot more. The list is what we have, like 40 people or something probably to get through that we want to bring on, Rodney. And we just want this to be kind of a really cool kind of a hangout, like a forum, like, hey, just over here in the green room, we're just gonna have this little chat on the side, but we're gonna record it. And so you've done that really great, and it's gonna be wonderful. I want to say thanks for everybody else coming and watching this episode with TJ Brumfield, and look forward to promoting any magazine articles or books that he may be writing, and in any way that we can help him out in Nebraska and in the Midwest. We'd love to do that. So with that, I'm going to sign off for this episode of Pen and Compass. And everybody, we look forward to you coming back and enjoying us talking to another great Freemason. Bye.
Thanks.
Keep seeking more light.